Do you feel like you're just teaching to the test? We all know and recognize that teaching to the test does not inspire or engage students, and it can be pretty overwhelming. But at the end of the day, we have to get our kids to a certain spot, and we want to set them up for success. So let's flip the paradigm, and instead of preparing for tests in a negative way, let's think about it positively. Let's see if we can provide students with an even better learning experience. The key factor is learning how to break down the standards in your teaching throughout the year and collect the data necessary to guide your instruction. This is Education Uncharted. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Lisa.
Thanks for joining us. We want to start by talking about how you can prepare your students for those standardized tests over the course of an entire year instead of test prepping just in the last 2 weeks before the big exam happens. So there are a couple of strategies that you can employ in your classroom to use the entire year and really cover what you need to cover as opposed to cramming at the last minute. Lisa, do you want to start us off with some specific tips to help us utilize the entire school year for preparing for that exam?
Yeah. So the first thing I think we need to do is we need to reframe our conversation about the tests. And it doesn't matter what the tests are called, the end of course tests, or in Virginia, they're the standards of learning. So, or in Tennessee, it's TCAP. So it doesn't matter what it is, but we need to reframe our conversation about the tests. First of all, the tests are not the devil. They are not a negative thing. Tests are for growth and to show what you know. So that's what I always say, whether it's a quiz, whether it's a summative test, whether it's the end of course test, I tell the students, this is just another opportunity to show what you know. This is not going to be a accumulation of every little bit of knowledge you have because it really is only just one snapshot of one day. And we have to understand that.
And I think that it also can help educators see where they are. What are they doing really well? Where do they maybe need to focus their understanding of how to access content in a way that students can better, achieve what they need to achieve. So it's not just information on students, it's also information on the teaching that's happening in the classroom. And that's not to say that it's a negative thing. Again, it's just giving you that temperature check and kind of seeing where your students are sitting, but also recognizing that it's not the be-all, end-all, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing that I think is important to say. I hear all the time, if our students aren't standardized or if there's no standard student, why do we give standardized tests? And it's not about standardizing the students. It's about standardizing the educational environment. And that's, I think, a big distinction that we need to say is because when my child is in your class, I want to make sure that he has the same education that the students in my class have, or the students in my neighbor's class have. And the only way to make sure to calibrate the teachers together, to make sure they're teaching to the same ability, the same quality education, is to give a standardized test where neither teacher can influence any of the outcomes.
So Lisa, what does it look like to take an entire school year to prepare instead of cramming in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, so this is a challenge, right, for every teacher. But I think instead of thinking about preparing for the test, we need to prepare ourselves to teach the standards because it's those standards that are going to be on the test. So there has been a change in standards over the years. And we can go way back where we used to teach to the Hallmark holidays. And then we started getting into topics. So like, for example, we would teach about the moon or about the planets, or we teach about dinosaurs, or we teach about living versus non-living things. But listen to the words that I'm saying. We're teaching about these content areas. Now, if you look at the standards now, it's not teach about this or the students will learn about this. This is where we really look at the wording of the standards. And there's a difference between the content and what the students are going to be doing with that content. So instead of just learning about the phases of the moon, the students will be predicting animal behavior based on particular phases of the moon. So we're taking information and applying it to another situation.
So focusing less on the what and more on the why, right? So not so much about I'm teaching a topic, but I'm teaching the why and the how we're going to access this knowledge and incorporate it into our understanding of the world around us.
Yes. And that's actually what provides us limits to our teaching. So if I'm teaching about the planets and I just know I teach about the planets, I can pull any resource I want. I'm going to do readings on it and I can pull more and more stuff. I'm going to build the solar system model that's going to take a week of painting styrofoam and I'm going to do all sorts of activities. But what is the limit of learning in 4th grade about the planets? What's the limit of learning in 6th grade? What do the students have to know? Because that's what's going to show up on the end of course test. So we need to be looking at the limits. We can't teach everything about the planets in 6th grade.
Right.
You cannot teach everything, or else they wouldn't have college graduate level courses on planets and planetary systems. So what we need to do is we need to figure out what is the limit and make sure our students are getting to that limit.
All right. And so we do that then by attending to that standard language and then collecting lots and lots of data.
Yep.
We are doing lots of formative assessments, and those can look like so many different things, right? We are having students practice and practice and practice and communicate and write and revise and model and all of the things that these standards are asking them to do. And as they're doing that, we're in some way collecting data, providing feedback, right? Kind of collecting feedback for ourselves too, right? From our students and using that to direct what's happening in our classroom. I think that makes so much sense. And that's what we're doing if we're teaching to standards anyway, which most of us are. That's what we're doing in our class without even having to think about preparing for a test. I think that it's super important to recognize that if you're following the structure that's been laid out for you, you really are preparing for these tests, right? And you are relying on that data. And sometimes it's even data that you're collecting through like the benchmarks, right? So you can even benchmark what's going on in your classroom as compared to the other 6th grade science classroom to kind of use that information to see who, hey, are you doing something different than I am that might be working better? Let's talk about it so that I can ensure that I loop that back into my classroom and continue to use that to push my students forward. Here's the problem. If we're stuck, right? If we're all stuck and we're constantly looping back, there's a point in the school year where we're like, we just can't anymore. I can't keep reteaching because I have to move on. So what do you do when that happens, right? You're collecting data. You are doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're trying to get kids to that point of being prepared. But for whatever reason, you're not getting them there.
Well, I think what happens a lot is let's take the whole year as an example. We teach, we assess, we teach, we assess, we teach, we assess. And then the students are doing well. We're excited. We get them all prepped and pepped up for that end of the course test. And we say, okay, now everyone has to like really focus, really buckle down. We're going to do workbooks for 3 weeks and we're going to just regurgitate or review information. we're cramming for a test is actually what we're doing. We cram for a test when we know that that's not a good thing to do. We're trying to just get them to memorize facts, getting them to remember facts, and then be able to repeat them on the test. And then something happens on the test, and we're like, well, they didn't do so well.
So reteaching is not cramming.
Right.
Okay.
So
okay.
what we need to do is we need to not just get the students to focus on facts and details. We need to get them, and we need to get our tier 1 instruction stronger. So that way we're focusing on that tier. That is it. We need to focus on our tier 1 instruction and make sure the students don't just know the information, but really understand the information. It's not about cramming at any point. It's not just memorizing to get to the end of the summative test. It's to get them to know the information so you don't have to review as much. We should get to the point where we say, do you remember in September when we learned about this? We're going to take this information now, we're going to use it and apply it to this next. And so our whole curriculum should be cohesive, where one topic flows into the other topic and they're building information. And if we think about it as we collect a pile of information here, and we collect a pile of information here, and we collect a pile of information here, then we are going to have to go back and remember what we did at the beginning because there's no connection between. So what we need is we need programs that are designed to integrate the facts, make it go from small to big, make some sort of integration to where we're required to learn previous information or tie that previous information into the next. So it's all building on each other.
So if a student doesn't grasp a concept the first time around, they're going to get additional times to connect it to other ideas that might help them finally understand how they can apply that in their own world and transfer that knowledge to other places.
Right. And so then instead of reteaching, we're remembering we've already learned this. We're not just remembering facts, we already learned this. So if we talk about matter and we talk about energy and cells, we can then build from that. And so now we're creating organisms. And so now we've used those cells that all have a nucleus and different function to create bigger things. And now that organism is living in an ecosystem and it's moving around and doing stuff. And then we have a cycle of matter that happens as that organism dies in that ecosystem. And then we have the decomposers and we have cycling of energy. We also have cycling of nutrients because of it. So now we have carbon cycle and we have the nitrogen cycle. And so we have this cycle. And so now we're going to, from the soil and things that are in the organic parts of the soil, we're going into the larger systems, into the earth systems. And so we're building on each other and we can keep bringing up these topics. Do you remember we did this? Do you remember we did this? And so it is spiraling the curriculum, but it's in a forward motion thing. So we are collecting our bag of tools along the way until we get to the end. And so then it becomes easy for us to show what we know because we've just been building the rungs of the ladder to help us grow.
It makes a ton of sense. I think in particular, we can focus on the idea that, remediation can come not only by pulling out groups to support them, but just continuing to maintain a spiraling structure in our curriculum. So that's definitely something to remember as we move forward. So now that you've done the teaching, you've spiraled the learning, you've allowed students to see that structure and the connectedness of ideas, what do you do next? You've got all this data. What do we do with it? One thing that I know that it took me a while to really understand is I need to be able to analyze that data. Just having it all in a grade book or, in some file somewhere, is something that we need to actually utilize that information to help us understand what we still need to do to help students get where they need to be. The thing is it does not have to be hard anymore because we have programs. There are solutions out there that will assess your students in quick formative situations, and they'll gather that data for you. They will help you isolate individual students' mastery, and then they might even be able to help you remediate. So they might even be able to send students down that specific path that they need to take to better understand whatever it is they need to grasp, or to just, make it to that next level, right? I know that you have a few specific programs that you are familiar with, and one that you worked really hard on.
I sure did.
So maybe you can talk about a few of those.
Yeah. So I think online programs really are the way to go. We used to do workbooks, but workbooks mean we have to grade and then we have to do the analyzing. And, there's so much, it's so hard to do that. So it's so much easier now that we have programs, even whether it's like IXL, which you have individual standards and particular games and lessons to go along with each individual standard versus just saying, oh, my students aren't doing so great in Earth and space science, or they're not doing so great on the Earth, Sun, Moon system. I can focus on the specific standards that the students need to work on at an individual level. So the whole class doesn't have to do it. So if you are doing great with Earth, Sun, and Moon, but I have no idea about gravity, I can work on gravity. You can work on the next skill that you need to work on. So there's ways we can personalize learning, but we can't do that in workbooks versus saying, do everything, then I can assess you, then you can move on to the next section. So using programs like IXL, using programs like Kahoot, where you can actually create little quizzes by—
And they're fun.
They are fun by standard. So anything that is standard space. And of course, Propello has a great way to assess student learning and to help support students. So giving them those practice, because it's not just practice in answering questions, but the questions that we've developed actually apply the knowledge. So it's using those content words, but using the verbs to analyze and predict and model. So we're actually getting them to do it, because there is nothing more frustrating than feeling like your students are succeeding. Then they get to the test and then we say, oh my gosh, the questions were so hard. Well, why were the questions so hard? We're just asking them in different ways, or we're not asking the right questions. So what we need to do is we need to have the right questions ahead of time. And so being a teacher, I have been so frustrated by that one test at the end of the year that makes it look like I'm not doing a good job.
Absolutely.
When that's not true, it's just the way the questions are worded. And we can't really predict it. But again, being a teacher, you can see afterwards and you can look at all the release tests. And that's something that I've had the time to do now that I'm not in the classroom, and I can create these for the teachers. So I'm actually creating questions that look like what they're going to see on the test. And they're using those verbs and applying that content in easy to assess format. So I'm actually turning them into multiple choice questions so they can get an instantaneous result to see, this is what I need to work on. This is where I'm doing well.
And that standards-based data is crunched for them.
Yep.
It's all there.
It does it. And so I, as a teacher, can just stick a child in front of a computer, have them take the test, and it's done for them. And I see the data that says, this is what my students need to work on. And then in the program, I, of course, have extra activities that I can use to do that to support the students.
That's it. It really makes the preparation for these tests feel much more seamless, right? It no longer is test prep. It's
better quality education.
It's just education.
It's education. It's
right.
And that's the thing too, is we put all of this emotion and energy into the test, right? And we say that everything ends at the test. And this is what we're working for. We're learning because we want to do really well on the test, but we're not learning to do well on the test. The test is one data point. We are learning to learn and to get it and to understand it.
100%.
The test, whether it's done at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, or the end of the year, is still just a benchmark to tell the progress that we've been doing. So when we put all this energy into it, and I mean, I've been in schools that have done big pep rallies to get us ready for the test and get us excited for the test.
I've been there too.
But what is that saying to the students, that it doesn't really matter all the successes that you've had along the way? It matters how you do on this one test. And there are so many factors that go into how you do on that test, whether you've had snack, whether you've had a good night's sleep, whether your grandparent is ill or your dog is scratching at the door all night. Like, there's all kinds of things that go into it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to do is we need to take that as a data point. But one of the problems is so many areas use that one data point punitively for both teachers and students.
And I think that's what makes testing feel so scary, because we look at it as the be-all, end-all.
Right.
And it's really important to recognize that despite the fact that these are important tests, especially for districts, they are still, as you said, just one piece of the puzzle. And it's important to recognize that we need to look at the whole student, the whole teaching ecosystem, in order to really recognize what's happening and the achievements that have been made over the course of a school year or over the course of a student's career or a teacher's career.
Right. And so that should be a data point to say, from this, we're going to look at the results. We're going to work on our school improvement plan. We're going to look at the teachers that have historically done really well, and we're going to use them as leaders to help guide us and to help not to be the boss, but to coach.
Yeah,
what
build the best
doing?
practices, right?
Yes.
What is it that's working in your class that I've never been able to get to? Having those moments of identifying those pieces and bringing the teaching and learning to a whole new level for every teacher.
Right. But when we look at it in terms of grading, where if you don't pass this test, then you have to go to summer school. That is, or if you pass this test, your salary goes up, or it's tied into your evaluation. When it's an evaluative piece of data, then that becomes personal. And this is not about personal. This is about building up that education system and making sure that students are where they need to learn. And again, if a student is consistently not passing these tests, we don't just say, well, the student should fail and take the test again. The student should fail and repeat the grade level again. We need to look at everything, that whole ecosystem. What has gone into the student's year? Are they showing up on time? Are they prepared for class? Do they have any learning disability that's an impediment? Or what's going on with the teacher, right? Is the teacher using a variety of strategies? And so we have to look at it and analyze it and move our instruction forward from there. And that's not just saying, well, if everyone's failing a test, to just pass them and move them on. But we need to stop and make a change and say, what are we doing? Where are we not succeeding as a community?
The last thing that I want to ask about is the idea of still doing some kind of test prep.
Mm-hmm.
You've laid a great foundation in your classroom. You've taught using standards-based teaching. You're analyzing the data. You are reteaching. You're working with your other teachers in your district to identify best practices. You've laid that foundation, right? Can you still do some test strategy testing? How do we feel about that? Is that a space that we can move into? Does it make us feel that we are, in the end, still teaching to the test? Or is it just giving extra support to students to help them feel confident in, that last data point that we're going to be collecting?
I think it all depends on our attitude towards it. So if we make it a chore it's going to be a chore. If we make it scary, it's going to be scary. If we make it punitive, it's going to be punitive. But if we take it as another way of students to see what they are doing well, where they need to work more on, and we take that easygoing attitude about it, don't spend an entire month doing the exact same over and over again, but give short test prep sessions and get them used to answering some of these questions, getting them used to using a computer to take a test. Sometimes some schools are using computers for all the tests, and some are using a combination of pencil and paper. But I mean, even down to in math class, we show our work. Well, how do we show our work when we're taking a computer test?
Right.
And the instructions will say, do not put a piece of paper up next to the computer screen. So we need to get them used to trying different strategies. We used to be able to say, answer all the easy questions first and then go back. Well, most tests are computer adaptive now, so you can't go back.
Right.
So you need to have an in-the-moment strategy. What are you going to do? What are some of the resources you can use when I can't ask my teacher for help? Because I'm used to asking my teacher for help. Or I don't know what this word means. What can I do instead? So giving some of those and letting them see that it's not so scary. Here's something that you can do with a little bit of support. It's that gradual release of responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Right? So we give them in-class support with tests where, yes, you can answer a question. Then we do some test prep where we're getting the same types of questions, but we give them a little bit less support. Until then, they're ready for the actual test. So I don't think it's a problem at all. And I think it's actually a really smart practice to do some, getting them used to what the test actually is going to look like.
What we're doing is teaching a full year of the students in building their knowledge, right? And then giving them that little extra one up to say, I understand what this test is doing, and I understand those tricks, and I have the key to unlock these questions in a way that will help me show my knowledge more clearly. For those of you who are feeling like your entire year is test prep as opposed to learning and teaching and questioning and understanding, think about how you can utilize this structure of teaching and then transferring that knowledge into a more standardized space, utilizing the resources that you have available to you that allow for students to show what they know and then collect that data for you so that you don't have to be spending all of the time doing the analysis. It's right there ready for you. And then you just spend a couple weeks at the end of the year or before that exam giving students keys to unlock their ability to, get around the tricky parts. I think it's a fantastic way to teach. I think it's the way that we can continue to move forward because testing isn't going to go away.
No.
And we don't want it to. In all honesty, it really can be a very useful piece of the teaching environment.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode, if you have more questions about teaching to the test or just teaching your students, let us know. Shout out in social media links. Please make sure that you like and subscribe to Education Uncharted. And share with us your tips for utilizing data and managing test prep-itis in your day-to-day.
Also, let us know if there's something that you would still like to see in your test prep repertoire. What are you doing or what are you missing? Because, hey, we're a couple of people that can make it happen.
Thanks so much for listening. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is Education Uncharted.